Welcome to Red Reality. Tonight we have two guests who are originally from Russia. Them and more people are organizing this Friday because of the one-year anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. They're here with us, Andrei and Maria. Thank you guys for coming. This Friday we're going to pressure the Russian embassy to stop the war. Are there many of you here who are organizing this? Many Russians?
Well, there are, in general, not many Russians live in Iceland, you know. There are only several hundreds of them, and unfortunately not all of them participate in this kind of activity. But last year there was a civilian initiative by Russians in Europe who started Russian Anti-War Committee. And first it started in Central Europe, and then it just spread all over the countries in Europe, in all Scandinavian countries. And in April 2022, we opened the Icelandic branch of it here in Iceland as well. So the main goal of this committee is to help victims of the war. The idea is first to help, of course, Ukrainian refugees who come to Iceland. Also to help Ukrainians who are still in Ukraine by providing them help. Second big project is actually to help Russians and people from Belarus who are against the war, and now they're in danger because the governments of these countries are hunting for them. So they have to flee from their countries. But of course, because they are Russians and because they are from Belarus, they don't have such privileges as people from other countries, because of course Russia and Belarus, they both are actors who started the war, who ignited the war. So it's very difficult for these people.
Yeah, I can imagine. Maria, can you maybe tell us a little bit about how, you know, the Russian media and the Russian state propaganda and so on, how they've been manufacturing consent, like similarly like what happens here in the Western world, where the Western media manufactures consent for the invasion of Iraq, for example, that its 10-year anniversary is coming up as well. That's also a war of aggression. Can you tell us something about that, how it manufactures
Yes, of course,
consent?
I'll try my best.
Please.
Mostly, as it seems, they just try to create a picture in which it would be obvious for the readers or for the viewers of TV programs that the people who are against war are a minority and that they are radical, and maybe even that they are criminals if they say that they're against war and our country should go to Ukraine and should fight against Ukrainian so-called Nazis. So it's just a false idea of being a minority, and people who have anti-war ideas or who don't like the government getting this information from the government and the media, they start thinking that they are alone. And they are afraid to express their opinions because obviously they are in danger if they try to share their views. Because you never can say that you're safe if you're speaking about such hot topics in public. Even if you're just talking to a friend of your friend, you never can be sure that this person will not leak the information to the government and will not disclose your true position. So it means that they all have to be alone on their own in this, and they have to keep it inside. And this creates a situation when they can create false polls saying that the majority of people is supporting the president and supporting the governmental policy and supporting the invasion, obviously. And of course, those numbers are absolutely made up. The sad thing is that European community and Ukrainians as well, they believe they believe this data.
Yeah, some people tend to not take it pretty seriously, which they, shouldn't. I think it's not to be trusted. But you're telling us that you don't think the majority of Russians are buying into the state narrative.
No, I don't think so.
but that the ones who disagree with the war, they just have to keep a low profile because otherwise there could be serious consequences.
Like, I would say, I'm not an expert here, but I would say that like people who oppose war and would be active given the chance, if we had that possibility, they would make at least 20%. But if we look at other 80%, those would be, not all of them are active people who are supporting the invasion. Most of those 80% would be people who just agree with the government because of some other reasons and because maybe they are scared to express their opinions. Some of them are just fooled by the propaganda so much that they don't think on their own about the situation. They just follow the general idea, so to say. But like among those 80%, maybe there are about 15 or 30, I don't know how many percent of people who are really went to this conclusion themselves, who are not just following the government. Again, this might be a dangerous situation.
I would like shortly add here that mostly when foreigners from outside Russia, when they discuss why Russians do not stand against the war, they mostly do not understand the situation inside Russia. They consider it with their own situation from their countries, like European countries. They think like if there is a democracy like in Europe or like here in Iceland and freedom of speech and some people can just go and talk about what they think, it's not like this in Russia. You cannot do this for many years already, and people already got used to it. So it's all came from the Soviet era, when state was punishing those who tried to speak loudly. Then there was like 10-15 years of this freedom of speech after the USSR collapse, and then Russian President Vladimir Putin, he started to build this system again. And it, like, you know, all these seeds, they just were thrown in the same soil. So the older generation, they already knew what it is all about. So they do not be like taught how to behave. So just they start to tell the children like, okay, we know everything about it, just don't speak, just don't be loud, just don't stand up, you know, and. It went through the decades. Like now we live in 2023. It all started like maybe 20 years ago. So there are already several generations, you know, appeared through this period. So why Russians do not protest? Because first they were taught that they will be in danger, and second they are in danger.
Yeah, it's something that's been learned because it's a real thing. But this has escalated now with the war. Like the government has closed down some media organizations, and some journalists have even been tried and put to prison.
Well, actually, as I see it, this is a mistake of perception as well, because Europeans only now start to look at Russia and to see what's going on there, what's wrong, why they don't protest. But it's just a different timeline, actually. So if we look at the year 2012, the Bolotnaya Square, when thousands of people went out to protest the Crimea annexation, I'm sorry, not Crimea annexation at that point, I'm sorry, but
against the Putin regime.
And
that was a big wave then.
1,000 people came out to protest then, and again, when the Crimea was annexed, again, a lot of people flooded the streets, and they were protesting very actively at that time. So then no one ever paid attention to what's going on in Russia.
They just continue to make deals with Putin's regime.
Yeah.
I'm talking about governments of the
They
European
arrested
countries,
independent journalists. They killed Nemtsov. They killed Politkovskaya a bit earlier.
So Nemtsov was one of the prominent governor of Russia, and later he became one of the biggest political opponents of Putin. So he was killed just like several hundred meters in front of the Kremlin in Moscow.
Wow, okay.
And Politkovskaya, she was Anna Politkovskaya. She was one of the most famous journalist investigators in Russia, mostly writing about this armored conflict in Chechnya region in the south of Russia during the 90s. And then she was killed in 2006 in the birthday of Putin. So they consider it kind of like a birthday present, because she was very annoying for the government because of her articles.
Yeah, for many years now, journalists who aren't towing the line or are like criticizing stuff that Putin really
literally
doesn't
dozens of them. There's a long list. There are dozens of journalists who were killed, and you know, like some people tell me, someone from maybe from other countries in Europe, they telling me like, why don't Russians protest against like Putin regime and everything? Like, for example, me personally, my first protest against Putin was in 2008.
Oh, wow.
When I was a student, and we went to the protest, and one of the biggest protests when it started, the wave. So we were protesting in Russia for many years, but people outside Russia just didn't see it. You know, they just say like, yeah, we still will buy gas and oil, and it's fine.
Yeah, why don't you re-elect another president? It's so easy.
Yeah, that's what they say. But the system is completely different. There's like not a democracy, and people who didn't live inside such regimes, it's very hard for them to imagine how it is there.
Yeah, with some people I've been talking about, they don't seem to realize, if you protest the war publicly and so on, you're probably going to prison, so yeah, exactly.
And not only you, but even your relatives can have problems there. Like, for example, you probably, your registration in some apartments where you used to live with your parents, for example, but now you maybe went to another city, for your study or work or whatever. You were arrested there because of the protests, but then police will go to search the house of your parents as well. And they do it pretty violently and just, turning everything upside down. And of course, for old people, like, it's a huge stress, and they can have health problems because of that. So it's like, if you go there, you need to understand that it will be huge problems for many people, not only for you. And also people who are going against government in Russia, they are not protected by any laws. Like, police can do anything with them. They can do anything with them on every stage of this process. Like, during the arrest, inside the police station, inside the police car, inside temporary place before the court, after the court, in prison. Anything can happen there, from like raping to killing, or like, to damaging, they somehow
torturing.
Yeah, torturing and everything. But people like from outside Russia, they prefer not to understand it, or maybe not to go deep in it, because it's not fine to learn about it.
So you have this movement of Russians who are not in Russia currently, and they're trying to do something to stop the war or protest Putin and so on.
So mostly we agreed in this movement that there was very important question just after the war started. There are two questions: if it's common guilt and if it's a common responsibility. So I prefer this idea when we were like discussing it. We stated that the guilt is related to the amount of power a person has. So
the guilt of each individual Russian.
The guilt. The guilt of the starting the war, starting the invasion. Like, President Putin has the almost absolute power in Russia, so his guilt is the biggest one. Well, I have Russian passport, so I also might have guilt, but I don't have that much power, neither to stop nor to start the war, So I have some kind of small piece of guilt, maybe like, there are like about 142 million of Russians in Russia. So like this one part of this, from this 142 millions, this is my guilt. But all Russians, of course, as I understand, we have responsibility to cope with the war, to help Ukrainians, to help them to rebuild the country when the war will over.
To pay reparations.
Yeah, and in many ways, with our own hands, with our money, with our future profits from selling resources, and so on and so on. It can be like a long list of it.
Yeah.
So we have responsibilities, but I don't think that I'm personally that my guilt is that big in this particular story.
I don't think so either. Like especially when this has been escalating, like people have been trying to protest and get Putin out and get something else going, but the police state has been hardening its claws and making it harder. So I think maybe you should feel a little shame for what your country is doing, but it's not your responsibility, especially if people have tried already. But can you tell me, like, who is Putin working for fundamentally? Do you think, like, what kind of society is Russia today? How has it changed since the invasion, do you think?
I can say very briefly that, well, as we know, Mr. Putin is a former KGB agent, and as any person from that police system, he adopted this very simple structure of a society. Like, imagine a prison. In prison, you have some prisoners, or who can be, some of them guilty in some crimes, some of them not, because of the mistake by the court, but doesn't matter. So they are prisoners. Then there are some guards who, kind of don't let them go outside the prison.
Control them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Then there is some kind of administration of the prison, which organize the whole work. So this is the structure of the modern Russia, according to Mr. Putin.
Mm-hmm.
So he himself, he is of course in this administration of the prison, and he has some kind of, you can name it political elite, some kind of oligarchs around him who can just do his tasks, who perform these tasks. Then there is a huge system of these policemen, and I mean there is a different branches of this system, and it was like extended a lot during the last 20 years. We have so many, new branches, new organizations, new positions, new criminal articles, about everything. And then there is this population which need to be controlled. And inside this population, okay, I'm not going to dive there very deeply, but it's kind of crash course for you into the Russian prison culture. So there is different positions inside this society which are prisoners, because they have some hierarchy there. There are some top guys who are maybe close to the administration or close to the guards. They have the best food, best place to sleep, and then there is the lowest of them which have no rights at all, and anything can be done with them. So in this lowest position right now, there was a special state article was invented specially for this kind of people, and they were called foreign agents. It means that these people are somehow they were affected by the foreign influence, mostly by the US, because of course for Putin, his main enemy is always a common West, the US at the head of this. So these foreign agents, they cannot be trusted because they already proved that they are against the government. And usually in modern Russia, it's the most prominent politicians, opposition politicians, scientists, journalists, some leaders of opinion, like bloggers. It can be even like comics, like a stand-up comics. It doesn't matter. So this is the foreign agents, and they're the most the lowest part according to Putin, the lowest part of the society. And then the majority of the population, they're somewhere between. They're just common mass.
Mm-hmm.
And for him, the biggest his biggest nightmare maybe if these prison guards will turn against him. So he tries to make everything just to please them, we have a special social privileges for kids of policemen or for kids, for those who go to war to Ukraine. Like they have like free entrance to universities, for example. They have many additional, like not salary, but some benefits, and so on and so on. There's a long list of this. So the state doing everything so these prison guards, they will be pleased, and they will not turn against the government. So
and
this
again,
this is
when
the
the
structure.
protest is going on, they get about 5,000 rubles, which is about 10,000 Icelandic kronas for every person arrested.
Really? Oh.
Yeah, because they press charges to a person about like 30,000 Icelandic kronas, and then the person pays it, and it is divided into 3 parts. One part goes to finance the army, one part goes to the government, and one part goes to the policeman who arrested the person.
Yeah, it's similar to what
A
has
nice
happened.
game, catch as much as you can.
Yeah, like the policies that are seen in the United States sometimes also where you incentivize police officers to make arrests and so on. But Maria, would you say that which interests are, you have this police state, but which interests is the government serving?
Oh, that's
I know it's a
very
tough question. But what would you think?
Yeah, I would think that mainly Putin is focused on maintaining the power at any price. It's just a drug for him. And of course he is concerned about his children's well-being, I guess. And he created a close net of people who he supports since the 90s or even earlier, which were some kind of his friends or maybe acquaintances who proved loyalty to him. And so he's basically protecting this small amount of people who benefit from the regime. And of course, all the policemen and all the people who have force right now, they benefit from this malfunctioning system because they know that it is really corrupt and they can do whatever they wish. And basically, they just know how it works. It's so easy when you know whom to give the bribe, whom to say a kind word, whom to ask to do something. So lots and lots of people, they just like this system as it is, and they are not interested in making it a different way. What else?
Would you say it's an oligarchy?
It's not just oligarchy. I think it's mainly people. Yeah, well, people who hold resources, but also the military, because I guess Putin made his homework after the putsch in 1991, when he realized that the army played a role when they were seizing power, and a significant role because, quite smart people were the heads of army, and they had a power and independent from the government, so to say independent, okay, not very independent, but still. And at least they could use their forces to change something. And as he realized that, he decided that that will never happen again. And in the 90s, he killed generals. He made some plane crashes, some accidents, whatever happened. General Lebedev was a very bright person. He was actually against war, the general against war. Yeah.
But so he was removed.
He was removed very quickly. And I just think that, he just decided that he doesn't want to have any bright heads in the army, any people who would think independently, any people who would be brave enough to be in opposition to his opinions. So he just removed them.
Yeah, the main criteria how Vladimir Putin gathered his government is now it's not even, that person would be clever a lot or be a professional, but it's just the only criteria is to be loyal. And this is the main thing. And it was going like this, as I said, during the decades. So now we have, in many positions, we have some people who are actually cannot perform their duties, but they are loyal to the government, and it's enough for them.
That has become the most important thing for
him. And the thing is, if we just step back for a second to my metaphor about the prison, the main idea there that these laws, which were written in these recent decades, they applied only to these so-called prisoners. So these policemen and like this administration, oligarchs, they are like outside these laws. So these people, they can do, like, for example, policemen, they can torture people, they can rape them, they can beat them. They will not be punished for that. And
so they're protected from above.
Yeah. So, and policemen knew about it, because if they would know, if they would not be sure that they can do this without any punishment, then they will maybe stop to do this. So this is the main thing.
I find it interesting that you're saying, though, like 20 years ago when the invasion of Iraq happened, which is also another illegal invasion, people got riled up in the States. Like, they were really buying into the propaganda and the narrative and really tooting their horn and waving the flags, But you're saying that this has not been the case in Russia as much, or people aren't exactly buying it?
So do you mean like what would happen if Russians will gather together with the flags and like?
Yeah, I'm thinking like the spirit after the invasion. Like, were Russians really, many of them, like totally buying the narrative and going, we have to invade the Ukraine,
No. And as you can see, when they annexed some new territories, there was no such a rejoice among Russians. I mean, not stage rejoice, because there was a show in the central square near Kremlin when people were shouting and gladly congratulating each other with the annexed territories. But it wasn't real. It was just a staging. But we can't see any public reaction to the territories that they gained or to the territories that they lost, because when they lost some newly gained Ukrainian territories, there was no public outcry like, how could you, we just gained it at such a price, we lost a lot of people, what happened? Nothing like that. It's just indifference. Yeah.
And then maybe orchestrated and shows where maybe the people are brought in to make it appear like people are very happy about what's happening and so on.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit before we close about the consequences of the war. Like, of course, we have terrible things happening in Ukraine itself. A lot of people, this is the biggest refugee crisis in Europe since World War II. Do you think the Russian economy is tanking right now, first of all? And how do you think the Ukrainians are faring that are moving to other countries?
First, maybe about Russian economy.
So about Russian, if you want to say something.
It was gas and oil based economy. Russia never produced any goods. Like, we always bought them from abroad, even carrots. As I sometimes say, sometimes you can find cheapest and best quality carrots from Israel in Russia, as if it's so hard to grow them at our land. But what I'm trying to say is that they used to produce some products in Russia with the help of some foreign ingredients. So right now, when there are sanctions, it is impossible to produce some elementary things like sausages or sour cream or some food for babies, whatever, hygienic products, medicine. It's all suffering a lot. So there are problems in every single segment of Russian economy. And so if we speak about Russian economy, it never was strong. It was a legend that it is strong, because they bought and they resold. Bought and resold. It is nothing like production based. They didn't produce things. They bought it.
So people are suffering.
So basically, the rise of Russian economy was caused by oil prices and gas prices. And right now, of course, it is declining.
I remember at the start of the war, Sergei Lavrov said that the Russian people are strong. This is Lavrov. He said the Russian people are strong and they can bear the burden of the war. Do you agree with this sentiment?
Actually, I agree with him, yes, because Russian people, they used to live during the Soviet years when the amount of food was very poor, and in general all the services, the whole economy was military based and military oriented, If we discuss the Russian economy, how it was damaged by the war or by the sanctions, for example, it's definitely not that big damage as probably some European countries expected. First of all, sanctions they affecting the Russian economy very slow. We saw that last year it was finished even with a little growth of the Russian economy, several percentage. We can expect that by the end of this year there will be some small decline, but we know that, for example, Russian state, they found new customers in other countries for gas and oil.
But they're selling it very cheap.
Not that cheap, actually. The difference in price less than 10%. And even in Europe, when where some countries agreed to set the upper limit for the oil and gas prices. For example, the last time they put it as much as $100 for oil, which is actually fine price for Russia even before the war. So it's not that big effect. Of course, there will be a long period effect on the economy, but we probably can see it only in many years.
Yeah, it's just inertia, you know.
Yeah, of course,
It is too heavy.
But I don't agree
to change
that
fast. But
yeah, that's true. But
it's
I don't agree it helps a lot to stop a war.
Yeah.
In Ukraine, because obviously people in Ukraine, they need to stop they need this assistance much faster than the sanctions work.
Yeah.
And if we look on the example of the Iran, which is under sanctions for how many, 20 years at least?
Yeah,
even more. Yeah, the state is still there, even with some protests and everything. It's still there. It's still it was not overthrown or something. The latest example was they even still buying some foreign planes, like Airbus, just basically stealing them through some fake companies in different countries, and yet. So even Iran can survive it. And of course Russia now is under much more serious sanctions than Iran is. I don't think it will throw the whole economy down to in this year or maybe even in 3 years.
But as I see it, the government will benefit from it, because if the economy is not strong enough, I mean long term, when the war ends, they will benefit from it, because when the economy is not strong enough, the people are hungry, the people are not very active, they are trying to survive, they are not thinking about politics, they are thinking about survival. So
that's one of the things I thought was really appalling about what Lavrov said, because he was saying the people can bear the burden, but he is not going to be bearing the burden.
No, of course not.
He's super privileged.
Well, it's enough food for many people actually in Russia yet. But the thing is that Putin, he kind of set a trap for himself before the war, because during the decades he was working a lot on making this population mass unresponsive to his political actions. Those people need to be very passive in political way, not to vote, not to protest, not to participate, not to move their own candidates and so on. Now, when the war started, he tried to shift the whole state regime from this autocratia, where the population passive, to some quasi-totalitarian regime, where actually all citizens, during the Soviet Union, they have to be politically engaged, like how it was during the Soviet era, for example, when there were these political clubs or meetings on every level of the social life. There, you probably don't know, but there was some clubs on workplaces where they have regular meetings and they discuss there some political stuff of the Marx and Engels and Lenin and Stalin and so on, and where
party meetings.
Yes, yeah. And where they where they, punish like publicly, with words, those who are trying to stand not behaving according to the codex of the behavior of the perfect Soviet citizen, something like that.
You could get excluded from the party.
Yeah, and without actually, even in Soviet Union, it was a common practice that without being a member of political party, of the main political party, your career path or your study path will be much more difficult. So you have to be politically engaged during the Soviet era, even if it's just not like nominal, but you still have to state it. It should be pronounced. Now in modern Russia, it was like you have to be passive. That's what they taught during the 20 years. And now, immediately at 24th February 2022, you turned like from the, to another person.
You need to be politically active, but only the way the government wants you to be politically active.
But it's
and now
like
they're trying
people.
To raise a different generation, training kids to assemble Kalashnikovs, to hold them in hands. I mean, there are pictures in media showing like kindergarten children are holding patrons and guns.
Or
they are taught
trying to foster this like military culture.
Yeah. Or at least to draw this Z symbol everywhere, or like make figures of this Z symbol consisted from children, or like even in schools or everywhere. So like there is this requirement from the state to Russian people to be engaged now and actively support the war, which many of people like. Millions, hundreds of millions, what I mean, dozens of millions, they are not ready to do this.
Yeah. I want to get in on about the Ukrainian refugees.
Yes.
Because we have this labor dispute in Iceland right now with Efling. And there are many Ukrainians working at Efling. And I just kind of want to call out some of the politicians and powerful people here in Iceland who say they support Ukraine and they support Ukrainians, but they don't want to pay Ukrainians a living wage. That's not okay, and they should do something better, pay up,
Yeah, but of course it's a businessman who pays salary and not politicians themselves. So it can be like different people. But
the people out there, they're
but
not
I agree
all
with you
waving
that
the flags.
But I agree with you that all employees need to be paid properly.
A living wage.
Yeah.
Well, Friday, outside the Russian embassy, we're going to
outside Russian consulate. It's on the Tungata 24, close to the Russian embassy, but a bit different place.
I see. 5:30. Great. I hope many people will show up, and thank you very much for speaking with me.
Thank you.
There's much more we could discuss if we had more time, and maybe we will later.
Hopefully.
Og þakka ykkur kærlega fyrir gestir að hlusta. Við vonandi sjáumst þarna á föstudaginn, en ég vil líka benda á að það eru mótmæli á morgun klukkan 5 á Austurvelli, mótmæli gegn útlendingafrumvarpinu sem er núna bara á síðustu metrum. Þannig að við viljum tala gegn því, þá er tíminn núna. Takk fyrir.